Today we're going to be taking a look at the H3 podcast put on by Ethan Klein. You probably know by now that Ethan and iDubbbz are in a bit of an argument, with iDubbbz making a content cop on Ethan, and Ethan basically destroying iDubbbz in response. Well, now Ethan's putting out even more crazy information about iDubbbz. That's right, if you look right here, you will see an episode called Ian and Anissa's boxing coach calls in live. Shocking new details. Ethan Klein had iDubbbz's boxing coach on his podcast, and the boxing coach spilled basically just a ton of secrets. And today we're going to be taking a look at what he said and why it's terrible for iDubbbz. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So this right here is going to be our first clip. This is talking about how iDubbbz and Anissa, which is Ian's wife, flew out a bunch of content creators and influencers and bought out an entire hotel for them to stay in, as well as funding a massive party during Creator Clash 2. In case you don't know, Creator Clash 2 was a disaster, and it's not Creator Clash 3, that's this year's disaster. Creator Clash 2 was a couple years ago, and it failed horribly because instead of giving money to charity, the event actually lost money. According to iDubbbz, it lost over $200,000. And because it lost $200,000, the Creator Clash event didn't actually raise any money for charity on Creator Clash 2. In fact, they had to hold a whole separate event, a charity live stream, to try to get at least some money to go to charity in the end. The whole thing was a massive failure and quite honestly embarrassing. Now, iDubbbz's coach, this guy right here named Mike, he and his wife were both heavily involved in Creator Clash 2 because Mike was training iDubbbz at the time. So I think that's all the background we need, but just remember this event went on to lose $200,000 when they're talking about how much they spent on these parties. So let's get into this.
I think it was you, Kate, that mentioned that he and Anissa did in fact pay for Hassan and all of his compatriots to travel to and stay at Creator Clash 2.
Yes.
Yeah, so they were talking about that long before, about how they had to fly in all these people. First of all, they rented the hotel for over 300 creators and flew a lot of them in. When the first year it was much more scaled back. We just had a couple floors of like some place, like a nice suite place, but it wasn't extravagant at all. And then the second year they did that full hotel for 300 creators. They flew a lot of people in. One of the people they flew in was Froggy Tonic, and they flew him in from France.
That's insane.
And Froggy had told us that he was there to salvage the documentary.
Yeah.
And that was super offensive to us because we're like, what do you mean salvage the documentary?
I just want to hop in here with some context. The documentary that they're referring to was iDubbbz's trainer's wife here, whose name is Kate, I believe. She was actually hired to film a documentary on Creator Clash. It never ended up getting released. And this, what they're explaining now, goes into that because apparently Anissa and iDubbbz didn't like the documentary that she was making, to the point that they flew somebody in from France and paid for them to come in from France with a whole crew just to try to change it up a little bit.
And he said his job was to go around and like film Anissa having interactions with everyone. So we didn't know if that meant they were going to make the second documentary about how, or the actual documentary about how like Anissa was responsible for the event, because she did put a lot of work in for the first event and she did put a lot of work in for the second, but at the same time, in the first event she didn't get credit for it, so she felt like she deserved all the credit. So I think that's why they paid Froggy Tonic to come film her and follow her around for the second event. But yeah, they flew in a lot of people. They rented out the whole hotel for 300 creators, and when we asked them if Ian's dad was going to be there because he was there for the first event, they said they couldn't afford to fly Ian's dad in. It was too expensive.
That's right. They couldn't afford to fly Ian's dad in because it was too expensive. And yet they were able to fly in not just a ton of creators, but also an entire team from France to try to film and make the documentary more about iDubbbz's wife. How does that make sense? Obviously, somebody doesn't like iDubbbz's father, and I don't know if it's iDubbbz, maybe it's more likely Anissa doesn't like him, because if they can afford to fly in 300 creators, there's absolutely no excuse to not fly in family, especially for something this big. Unless, of course, they knew it was going to be a disaster from the get-go. But I think that it's more likely, given some of the other stuff that they're going to talk about, that iDubbbz or his wife didn't want his father there. They just wanted to use the event, the entire Creator Clash, as a way to network with other creators. And that's why they were flying people out and they were getting entire hotels rented out for them, which is just crazy, because it's not like the creators can't afford their own hotel rooms, especially when you consider that this event ended up losing over $200,000. How much of that $200,000 lost was spent on renting out an entire hotel, throwing a party, and flying all these people out? But I would guess probably quite a bit of it. Now, our next clip here goes into why exactly they were so adamant on having the party with all of these creators. Apparently iDubbbz's wife, more so than iDubbbz himself, was very interested and felt it was very important for her to get to meet all of these creators and try to get her way into their friend groups. Yeah, apparently she's that desperate.
First year that like because she would always talk about a certain group of people. It was like somebody named Pokimane and all these other people. And she would always talk about how she wants like them to be there and she wants to be a part of their group. So a lot of it, and then so that's why like, and then the first year was like during that girl's birthday party. So
no, sorry. Knowing that detail, it breaks my heart that she had to settle for denims.
That's right, Anissa was so desperate to try to get in with Pokimane and her crew, which I guess at the time would have been offline TV, that she spent all this money, at least according to the coach. I can't help but think that this money could have been better spent on, you know, running the charity event and maybe giving something to charity, but who knows. But hey, who am I to criticize her? However, just to make that seem a little bit worse, iDubbbz coach here claims that before the event, right, so this is before the party was thrown and all that, Anissa, iDubbbz's wife, told him and his wife that Creator Clash was over $500,000 in the hole, which would mean that iDubbbz and Anissa were aware that Creator Clash was having financial difficulties before the event, and they were probably aware that they weren't going to make that money back. Maybe they were just full of copium and they were thinking, oh, we'd make it all back on the pay-per-view, which they obviously didn't. But yeah, I think it makes it a little bit worse if they already knew that they were in the hole and spending too much money before wasting a bunch of money on an extravagant party. What do you guys think?
Actually believing it. But so for that second event, so I tell him he needs to do 2-a-days. This is like 2 weeks before the fight. I'm like, we need to do your 2-a-days. And I said, my brand is at stake. Well, he went and told Anissa that I told him my brand was at stake. So the next day she comes into the gym super mad and she's like, our brand is at stake. We're $500,000 in the hole right now.
I wish I knew that. I wish I knew that at that time. I think a lot of the fighters would have liked to have known that. I don't think none of them needed to be in the dark about that, you know?
Yes, completely. Well, and that's the thing. They said you guys didn't promote enough, but they weren't honest about the fact that they were spending the money from the ticket sales on the hotel, on flying people in, on all these other things. So it was just like, so
those decisions, the gala decisions, were made while in the red.
Yes.
I have a question about that.
So she was like, we're already down 500,000. And she still had time to cancel stuff when she said that? Like, how before the event was that?
Yeah. I mean, it was 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks before the event. I mean, they
so
knew
she
they
could
were
have made some last minute moves. Yeah.
They knew they were 500K in the hole long before that, right? That's just when they yelled at us about it.
Yeah.
So they could have definitely made moves to reduce spending.
We wanted that award show so bad the next day. They really wanted to have that award show so she could give out awards. Once again, you had heard, like Ian said, he didn't want to have the fight just end and have everybody go home the next day.
He said, I'll quote him because it's very rich. He says that the first time afterwards, he woke up and everybody was gone. And he found it super depressing because he didn't get a chance to process his trauma, which seems a little bit hyperbolic, frankly, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's like a self-inflicted charity event.
According to the coach, iDubbbz and Anissa knew that they were $500,000 in the hole before they held this party, and well, they would have still had time to make changes to try to save money. But apparently they didn't, because having the party and having the awards ceremony was so important to Anissa and iDubbbz for different but both terrible reasons that they couldn't cancel it. It seems to me that the biggest charitable donation that Creator Clash 2 made was to their egos, because I cannot understand how you could possibly know that your charity event is losing that much money and yet still go ahead with this big party and renting out a hotel for all these creators. Honestly, it's just bad management. On top of that, there were some less serious things to come out of this conversation, which are probably even more embarrassing for iDubbbz than the actual event failing, because here's iDubbbz's former coach talking about why iDubbbz tried to fire him.
Because then we went back to the hotel and then they were eating at Denny's and they said, we need to have a meeting. So I have to go to Denny's. And they pretty much then talked about how they were going to have to fire me because I reminded Ian of his father when his father would yell at him as a kid. Because then...
Yeah, Ian's a grown man, by the way, apparently still with father issues, to the point that he had to almost fire his coach because he was so upset that the coach reminded him of his father. At a certain point, you just gotta stop and look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself if you're being ridiculous. Because firing your coach whose job it is to yell at you, to get you amped up, to get you motivated, because he reminds you of your father, is just stupid. On top of that, iDubbbz's coach says that Anissa actually controls Ian to the point that she would tell him when he's hungry. That's right, let's take a listen.
And afterwards, everybody's hanging out, And she walks up to Ian and she goes, "You're hungry."
Yes.
And then so they had to leave because Ian was hungry. So she tells Ian when he was hungry. We're like, what the hell?
Ian is so whipped, according to the coach, that Anissa tells him when he's hungry. Is Ian like a 5-year-old boy? I mean, he's upset about his father and he needs somebody to tell him when he's hungry. That sounds like kindergarten to me. And it's not just embarrassing for Ian though, because the coach did throw some shade at iDubbbz's wife. In fact, here they talk about how iDubbbz's wife made iDubbbz uncomfortable while talking about how she wanted to marry a millionaire, which the implication from that is the only reason she married iDubbbz is because he's rich. I don't know if that's actually true, but that seems to be the implication of what they're saying here.
For being like the first person that Ian's ever been with, right?
Yes.
So in my opinion, what happened was she even told us, she used to always tell her mom, "I'm going to be with a millionaire." And so we think that once
she
she
used
kind
to
of got
tell her mom that she would be with a millionaire. How do you know
her
that?
mom told her that it had to be someone rich.
How did you know
Yeah.
that?
Well, she told
she
us.
would tell us that.
It was, I remember exactly. It was when we were in Vegas going to the other podcast and we were inside the Uber and we were with Ian and Anissa. And Anissa said that like her mom only had 2 expectations for her to marry someone that was rich and also to be of her religion, right? And so she said that Anissa goes, "Well, I mean, I didn't get someone that was of my religion, but at least I got one part of it right. He's rich." And then she like laughed about it, and then he was in the car, and you could tell he was bothered by it.
I was bothered.
Who wouldn't be bothered by it?
Yeah, who wouldn't be bothered by it? Because if your wife is implying that the only reason she married you is for your money, that's horrible. Especially because she's doing it in front of other people. That's incredibly heartless. And honestly, if that's true, I feel kind of bad for iDubbbz. But that's not the only thing that Anissa did that weirded out his coach Mike and Kate here. Apparently, iDubbbz had to miss a bunch of training appointments because during his training for a big boxing match, Anissa decided that she was going to have her implants removed.
Before he was supposed to start training for his fight camp, right? But then they didn't come and train, and then she decided that she was going to have her tits removed like during his fight camp.
Oh, that was the second one. That was
I said 62.
Oh, yeah.
So hold on.
That's right. iDubbbz missed training because his wife decided that she had to have an elective surgery. You couldn't have waited just a couple weeks? Granted, I know that might be a big ask when you consider that allegedly iDubbbz missed Max Mofo's marriage because Anissa wanted to get tattoos at the same time. So yeah, iDubbbz does have a history of putting things that Anissa wants to do ahead of his friends, at least if you listen to the popular rumors. But perhaps the most damaging part of this entire interview was when iDubbbz coach Mike and his wife Kate here explained that Kate has a very long history with a very unfortunate subject. She was actually sold into basically slavery in America. She was forced to marry a man that was significantly older than her. And because of that, she's done significant advocacy against child brides. Obviously, I feel like that's something most people would agree with, that in America we should have laws against child brides. But apparently a lot of states don't have those. So according to them, when they approached Anissa and iDubbbz to ask them to help them promote her advocacy against child brides, Anissa turned them down.
At the age of 12, I was put into a child marriage from the time I was 12 until 23. Within my child marriage, I had 2 kids when I was 15 and 17. And this happened in America, okay? And Ian and Anissa are well aware of my story because I've had them at my home. They've seen my kids and everything. And so last year, right, 2024, I learned that there was a House bill in Washington State trying to pass House Bill 1455 to end child marriage. And so when I learned of this bill, I thought to myself, even though it had been 15 years since I escaped my prison, like this is a chance for me to come forward and tell my story. I sent, so Michael and I went to Olympia in Washington. We met with politicians. We lobbied to support the bill. I gave my public testimony to support the bill. And, I was on Seattle Times and television and everything. And I reached out to Ian and Anissa and I asked them if they could help, share the information because it was really important to me that this bill passed. And they just both left me on red. But guess what? Today, when they saw the highlights on Ian's story that we were going to be on here, Anissa was texting me and Michael, and they were like,
they reached.
Yeah.
Yeah. They ignored us when we were like trying to fight child marriage, but then when they found out,
are they pro child marriage?
That's right. iDubbbz and Anissa apparently care more about Coach Mike here going on the H3 podcast than they did about his wife Kate's advocacy against child marriage, which I think says a lot about iDubbbz and Anissa. Let's be honest, it shouldn't take a lot for anybody to take a stand against child marriage. It's obviously a problem, especially if it's going on in America. It's not something that should happen, but apparently it still does. And the fact that they weren't willing to even text them back, that they left them on red when they asked them for help with signal boosting her advocacy against child marriage, but they were so quick to try to get in contact as soon as they saw Coach Mike's face appear in an H3 podcast thumbnail. What kind of person cares more about somebody going on the H3 podcast than they do about child marriage? I'll let you answer that in the comments, because I can't think of anything to say about that YouTube would allow. So yeah, there was plenty more in this interview, but that was the most damaging. A lot of it had to do with Creator Clash 2, because I don't believe that the coach and his wife were involved with Creator Clash 3, but I actually think the most damaging stuff was the stuff that they said that didn't really have too much relation to the boxing event, right? About how Ian has issues with masculinity, about how Anissa decides when Ian's hungry and tells him when they have to go, about how Anissa decided to get an elective surgery in the middle of iDubbbz training camp, throwing him off completely from his training schedule, and finally how Ian and Anissa left Kate on red when she asked for help fighting child marriages, but were very quick to get into contact when they saw that she was talking to Ethan Klein. So what do you guys think about iDubbbz and Anissa? Does this explain their behavior? Does this explain all the hate they're getting? Because to me it kind of does. I can now understand what kind of people they are, and well, at least in my opinion, they don't seem like very good people. They seem like egocentric narcissists, which, to be fair, everyone on YouTube is a little bit of a narcissist, but it seems like they took it to an extreme. It is important to note, though, that in this podcast, we do only have information from one side. We only have Coach Mike and his wife talking to us. We don't know iDubbbz and Anissa's side to the story, and to be fair to them, I just feel like we have to point out that they haven't had an opportunity to respond yet. So you shouldn't take everything Coach Mike here says as gospel. You shouldn't believe that it's entirely true. However, in my opinion, he is a fairly credible witness to this kind of stuff because he spent so much time with iDubbbz. That being said, let me know what you think about this whole mess in the comments. Thank you so much for watching all the way till the end. Remember to like and subscribe. Have a great day, and God bless you.